Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. We're going to be taking a look at how to make this really cool planet with rings using nothing but procedural shaders. So let's jump in. So the final tutorial will probably be about 30 minutes, and that's probably what you're watching right now, is the 20 to 30 minute long version on YouTube, which has got all the main points that really get you to this image. When I finish the live stream, I take it down and I put it up just for everybody that's on Patreon, everyone that's a channel member on YouTube. And then I take that video and I cut it into a shorter, more concise tutorial. So a lot of stuff that we did today, a lot of the experimentation. I mean, the full live stream is an hour and a half long. So we've done a lot of different things. And all that is going to be just up for Patreon and for channel members on YouTube. If you'd like some extra content and you want to find out some more of what I'm doing, you feel free to check out those places. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we're going to get our planet set up. Now, I want to create kind of a gas giant. So I want to have this like kind of soft planet that has like a bit of like light permeability. So it feels like it's a gassy kind of planet, like a big gas giant. And in order to do that, we're going to use a couple of tricks to make sure the light is passing through the surface of our object and just creating that nice soft feel to the overall planet texture. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit A to select all and X to delete just for fun, because why not? Let's have fun. And I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to create a UV sphere. And I'm going to scale it up a bit just for, I don't know. Why not? Each one of these squares is a meter, so this is a very small planet, but we're not going to worry about technicalities, not on this channel. All right, we're going to come over to the modifiers, and we are going to add a subdivision surface modifier. That'll just smooth out the edge a little bit, and I'll make sure my level viewport is matching my render so I can see exactly how it's going to look when I render this thing out. All right, now the first thing we want to do is select the object. We're going to come over here to the Material tab, and we're going to click New to create a new material, and we'll call this Gas Giant. Now, I'm going to open this side panel up here. And if you don't know how to open side panels, you just move your mouse to the corner of one of your windows and you get this little plus symbol. So I'll do it somewhere where you can actually see it, where my head's not in the way. So if you see I get this plus symbol, if I click and drag, it's going to split out the view. And if you ever want to get rid of one, you can do the same thing. Find the corners and then click and hold and drag, and it's going to give you that arrow. You can drop it in. You can go in any direction with these. So it's really helpful for creating whatever layout you want. So I'm going to switch over to the shader editor, and I'm going to just minimize this a little bit and zoom in. Okay, so let's also set up our render settings so we can start to look at how our final result is going to appear. So we're going to use the AV render engine so we can get a real-time result. And I'm going to go for ambient occlusion. Actually, we don't need ambient occlusion, so I'm going to leave that off. Ambient occlusion is basically when two objects get close to each other, you get a little bit of a shadowing effect where they overlap. It's great for objects that are like, you have lots of like detail on an object. It helps bring out that detail, but we don't need that because we're not really going to have things intersecting, so it's never going to be used. I'm going to turn bloom on. That'll help make things glow and they get really hot and really bright, and then I'm going to turn on screen space reflections. And I'm going to open up this drop down, and I'm also going to turn on refraction, and that's going to be really important for one of our steps coming up. So once you've got all those settings set, what we can do is we can switch to render view, and we're not really see anything. Let's go ahead and make space just to kind of set the mood. I'm going to take my color of my background, if you click on the world tab, and I'm going to drop it down to black. If I turn off my controllers with these two buttons up here, you can see now we don't see anything. I could even hide this by hitting T. Now, let's come over here to our shader, and we're going to switch from object to world. And then we're going to go Shift A, and we're going to grab a noise texture and a color ramp. All right, this is the easiest way to make stars. I'm going to take the factor of my noise texture and plug it into the factor here of the color ramp. You could also use the color. It doesn't actually matter in this case. Factor is basically a black and white version of what this noise texture outputs, and the color one is a colored version. So different use cases. Now I'm going to make a little bit more room. I'm going to bring my color and I'm going to pipe it into the color of my background. Now you can see this cloudy look. And I'm going to drag this down, and then I'm going to take my noise texture and I'm going to crank my scale all the way up to 600. So it's really, really fine noise texture. And then if I drag this in, it's going to cut off more and more of the bright bits and leave me just with this nice star field. Okay, now if it's a little bit, might be too many stars, I can drag these in together to brighten them up a little bit. You may not be able to see that very well with the YouTube compression, but you can adjust it basically by adjusting the scale here to determine the size and how many stars you've got. Okay, that's pretty good. I might pipe the strength up to 2. That will also make them a little punchier, make them glow some. Now let's switch back from world to object. And with our sphere selected, if you get confused, you can always turn these controls back on to make sure you've got it selected. I'm going to come to my material and let's start making this gas giant material. I'm actually going to create a light too. We need something to see with. So I'm going to Shift A, come down to light, and we're going to go sun lamp. And I'll just hit R to rotate. And I'm just going to rotate it to kind of just create a nice little half moon shape. And I might turn my strength up a little bit. Let's go to like 5. It's going to start giving me a little bit of bloom because it's quite bright. And let's go back to our sphere, select the sphere. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to use, we're going to create some colors. So let's go for a noise texture, just like we did with the space. And we're going to create a color ramp. And I'll plug the factor into the factor. And I'll take the color and put it into base color. And that's going to start to color the surface of our planet. Now I'm going to change these colors. I'm going to bring them up, give it kind of like a gassy orangish color. And I'll actually make these pretty similar and drag them in so they're a little close to each other. Maybe not that similar. It's a little too similar. There we go. So just a little bit of difference between the two. And I'm going to bring my scale, I'll bring it right down to, let's try 1. And I'm going to turn distortion up. And that's going to start distorting this this material. And I can play with my roughness and my detail. That will kind of roughen up this surface a little bit. And I can hold down Shift as well to change the speed of like how much I'm changing these values. That's kind of nice, actually. What if we rotate this planet on the Y and on the X? Actually getting some nice kind of bands. Oops. That's kind of nice. I could bring these in a bit closer to make those bands a bit stronger. And I can use my detail and roughness just to break up the edges. You can see it gets like rougher, more cloud-like. Okay, so that's nice. Nice subtle look. Now I'm going to drag my roughness up because I don't want to have a reflective planet because planets don't reflect their environment. And I'll turn my specular up a bit. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to turn up transmission. But in order for transmission to work, I've got to change a few settings. Now, what is transmission? Transmission, it's basically the value that you want to change if you're making something into water, right? Because transmission allows light to transmit through an object. So by turning this up, we're allowing light to pass through our object. Now, if I come over to my options, I get a couple of options here. And we've got green space refraction and subsurface translucency. We're not going to use this because we're not doing subsurface, but I'll turn on screen space refraction just because it'll help the transmission work a little bit better. Now, I'm also going to, so see, I'll bring this up a little bit more, and I'm going to turn my light up. That'll help the light kind of fill out a little bit better. It's going to really soften up the look of this planet. Now what I can do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make the edge a little transparent so that it's not such a crisp edge. This will really make it feel like a gas giant. So I'm going to use a node called the layer weight node. And the layer weight node has a really cool effect where wherever a face in our object, so if you look at the geometry of our object, wherever one of these faces, these polygons, is facing the camera, it's going to shade it black. And wherever faces begin to look away from the camera, the further away they're looking, the more it's going to shade them white. So you get this nice gradient towards the edge of an object. All right. So I am going to use these spacing is a little bit of a softer fall off and Fresnel's a bit of a harder fall off. I am going to grab a color ramp as well, though, to give myself even more control over this. And I'm going to plug the facing into the factor, and I'll plug the color, plug it into the emission first so I can demonstrate it. Go back to rendered view. So you can see what's going on there. It's not glowing here in the center because this bit's facing the camera. If I drag this out, you can see what it's doing. Now I'm going to soften this up a little bit by switching from linear to ease. And then what I'm going to do is instead of plugging into the emission, I'm going to plug it into my alpha. Now an alpha channel is basically the channel that determines whether things should be transparent or not. Now you can see it's actually flipped. The edge is fully opaque and the center bit's transparent. It's also looking a bit funny because we have to turn on the setting. We can invert this by just flipping these. Okay. And then we also need to come over here to options and with blend mode. Now this is only for Eevee. You have to set this for Eevee. Cycles, it'll just work. But in Eevee, we got to go alpha hashed or alpha blend. I'm going to select alpha blend. I'm going to turn off show back face. And I'm going to select alpha hashed. Lucas says the whiskey and cigars voice suits you well. Welcome to today's Blender tutorial. We're going to be making a planet with rings. Think of how many subs I had if I sounded like this all the time. Okay, so by plugging this into the alpha, you can see now it's, by turning on alpha blend, alpha hash, basically allows Eevee to know how to interpret alpha and how to show it. So you can see now we're able to see through the edge a little bit, which is kind of cool. And we can refine that just by dragging these values here. If I bring the black down a bit, it's going to always make sure the edge is not fully transparent. So that'll just give us this nice soft edge. Now it looks like this, giant gas giant. Giant gas giant. Very helpful with my my English. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a camera. So I'm going to Shift A, camera. Hit 0 on my number pad to jump into the camera view. You can also get there by turning on your controls and clicking the camera icon. That'll stick you inside it. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to find a nice view of my planet. And I'll go back to my camera and I'll turn off lock camera to view. That way I can zoom back in a little bit and get a closer view. And then I'm going to come over to the camera tab and I'm going to go viewport display and I'm going to turn up pass bar 2. That darkens the outside. It just helps me focus on my image. Doesn't really change anything in terms of render settings. Okay, so how do we make rings on a planet like this? Well, we're actually going to do some tricky stuff. There's going to be a lot of ways to make this, okay? But I'll show you one way to do it. And I'm going to try to explain it as clearly as possible so you can follow along, all right? I'm going to create another sphere. So Shift A, UV sphere. I'll scale it up so it's a bit bigger and I can see it. I'm going to right-click and shade smooth. And I'm going to go into edit mode. And with all these faces selected, I'm going to show you the UV editor. Now, the default sphere, when you make a UV sphere in Blender, UVs are already unwrapped. All the default objects are already unwrapped. And UV is basically, it's a map that helps Blender know how to position a texture. So each one of these little squares is one of these squares, one of these polygons. And you can see that what they've done is they've actually made these cuts up at the top, these like sawtooth cuts. And those sawtooth cuts are up here at the pole, right? And they've cut it this way so that the entire sphere lays flat. So you can see each of these squares is the same size. And it'd be really easy to just grab a flat texture and drop it onto this, and it's going to wrap it around the sphere pretty perfectly. It will pull a bit at the tips because you can see these polygons are quite long, or these triangles are quite long, and these are quite short. So it'll start to pull that texture as it places it up here, and it will pinch it up at the top, right? Because everything's basically pulled towards the poles when you unwrap something this way. What this gives us, though, is it gives us the ability to use this UV layout to create rings. Because what we can do is we can create a noise pattern and we can scale that noise pattern up really easily on the X or on the Y. And if we scale it like all the way on the X, or make it 0 on the X, right, it's going to just be a Y pattern, which will put these like basically stripes, these lines, this striped pattern. And then what we can do is, because it's a sphere, the stripe pattern is going to be wrapped around. And now we can reshape our object in order to get rings. So what I'm going to do is actually apply the material first, and then we'll go into render view, and I can let you watch this kind of happen so that hopefully that what I just described kind of makes a bit of sense. So I'm going to leave this up. I'm going to open this up here, and I'm going to switch to my shader editor. Drag this out here, and we're going to go to render view. Now, go easy on yourself if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense at first. You're thinking about UVs, it's a pretty advanced topic, and it's hard to wrap your brain around at first, but hopefully this will make sense as you watch it. I'm going to call this material rings, and I'm going to come over here, zoom out a little bit, and I'll pull this up. We don't need this as big. Actually, we don't really need, well, I'll leave it up for now because I will show you. I'm going to start by creating a noise texture. All right. And I'm going to plug this noise factor into my emission. So we're just going to look at this one thing. Now, the next step is I want to actually make this a little bit harsher. I want to put some contrast in this noise. So I'm going to grab a color ramp. And I'll put it here. Okay. And I'll pull this like this to create that contrast. All right. Now what I want to do is I want to turn this into rings, right? So how could I do that? Well, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab a texture coordinate node, The reason why I need a texture coordinate node is because I'm about to use a mapping node to change the UV layout. So it's important that I have a texture coordinate node first. Blender always requires that when you use a mapping node. So I'm going to grab my mapping node. Now remember, Blender is always by default using generated. So if I plug the generated into the vector and the vector into the vector of my noise, nothing's going to change. It can all stay the same. So now if you look, if I take my scale on my X, right? And let's pull it down. I'll go all the way to 0. It's now stretched this noise across my sphere. But you can see if I come to the edges here, it's not stretched on this side. And it looks very strange on this side. Right? So it's only really kind of stretched it here. I could try, you know, like, okay, let's make Y 0 as well. That actually would probably do it, more or less. Still getting some weirdness there, but you can see we're getting these rings, okay, which is, you know, kind of what we want. We have this ringed thing. Now, if I use, not generated, if I use the UVs that were laid out, so remember these are what the UVs look like. Let's have a look at what this thing looks like. We'll put this back to 1 and 1. So there we go. So that's how it looks like when it's laid out with the UVs. You can see we get a seam, right? It's not perfect because with generated, you see it, it'll wrap around. There is no seam anywhere. That's just because we're intersecting the other sphere. But if I use the UV, there's going to be a seam because, if you recall, get to the edge, it doesn't just continue. It's got to like start back over here. So it's taking this noise texture and it's laying it on this square. And as it meets the edge, it just stops drawing it, and it starts up again wherever the noise was here. So that's where you get a seam. And that's one of the drawbacks of UVs. If I take my scale, right, you can see I do the same thing. If I make it 0 on the X, it's going to do that same effect. It's going to stretch it all the way around, right? So now let's shape this into a ring. I'm going to look at this from the side. I might turn this sun off so that I can just see the emission material. And I'm going to turn on transparent mode right up here, X-ray mode. And this will allow me to select not just the vertices in the front, but also the ones in the back. If I don't have this turned on and I like box select here, you can see it's not selecting anything on the back. But if I do have it turned on, if I box select, it's going to box select the front and the back. So if I jump into side view and I've got box turned on, I'm going to hit B to do box selection. I'm going to come down and I'll grab this group and I'll grab this group. So it's kind of dark. You can't quite see it, but I've just got basically these 3 rows here that I haven't selected. I actually want to switch to face mode. And let's see, I'm going to box select that group, and I'll box select this group as well. So I'm left with just one ring, right? I'll let X to delete these faces. Now I've got this one ring of geometry. Now if I increase the scale of my noise texture, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And with this set to 0 on the X, you can see that basically it's stretched this thing. It's just doing what we were doing already before, but now we're just looking at, you know, just the faces that are left. So how would I take this now and turn it into flat rings? Well, I can just go in and change the geometry. So I can switch to edge mode and hold down Alt to click. That's just a shortcut to click an edge loop. It's the same as if I was to hold down Shift and just go through and manually select all these. And what I can do is I can scale in a little bit. And you can see how it stays with the mesh. So that's the UV. So the fact that I'm using UVs as the texture coordinate means that the texture is going to stick to the faces and stay the same no matter where I move the faces. If I switch back to generated, do the same thing. You can see how they're sliding around. It's the same with all of these. If I was used to use normal, they're going to slide around. We're going to get different results. Object coordinate is also the same. So I'm going to use the UV. And the UV is the trick to getting it to lock on. So that's how we can sculpt the shape of this, basically by changing the geometry. So I'll scale in a bit, and I'm going to drop it down so it's at the same Z level as the outer ring. So I'm going to turn snapping on and switch from increment to vertex. Now I can grab Z and bring it down and drag my mouse. And as I get close to a vertex, it'll snap on. So I'm locking it on the Z plane by holding down Z. So it's only moving on the Z or Z plane, depending on where you're from. And now I'm going to lock onto one of these, and it will take the Z position of one of these points. So now you can see it's this perfectly flat system. I'm going to turn snapping off now, and I can scale up this whole thing. I can come over here and add in a subdivision surface modifier to smooth it out. And now we've got rings. Now let's center everything up. I'm going to select my planet. Just going to make sure we're right at 0, 0, 0. So it's right at the center of my world. And I'll make sure this is centered up as well. And it is. Turn my sun lamp back on. And I'm going to bring this up. I want to intersect the planet perfectly with it, because that would make sense with gravity, right? So I need to, my origin point, say a little yellow dot, it's hovering above the plane of this disk. And that's because we started out with a sphere, we've deleted a bunch of faces. The origin has stayed in the center where that sphere was. We need to shift it down so it's now in the center of where this object is. So I'm going to go Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry, and that will just get sort of the average position of all the geometry and reset that for me. So I'll come back over here. Oh, and just as a reference, so if we go back into edit mode, and I go back to my UV editor, you can see that's my UVs for this thing. So we haven't really changed the UVs. It's still the same as what it was when we started. It's just we've gotten rid of a bunch of faces, and then we've changed their position in 3D space. So I hope that made a little bit of sense, kind of doing that step by step so you could really see it. Now, because we've dropped this thing down, we've changed the origin, I can now move it into the 0, 0, 0 position, and that will put it right in the middle there. And I can determine how far out I want these rings to be from the surface of my planet. And it's also cool, we're going to get this nice shadow. I'm going to click Alt to select the outer ring and hit S to scale and bring that out like so. All right, now instead of plugging it into the emission, what I want to do is plug it into the alpha. Now let's make sure alpha is set up for this material, because remember we're in Eevee. So come to Options, Blend Mode. We need to switch this to alpha, hash, or blend. The difference between these is just a rendering effect. So hashed gives it kind of like a noisy look, and blend gives it a smooth look, but blend has some limitations. So blend, you can't see through to the other side of an object. That's why often it turns on show backface automatically, which means showing you the back-facing polygons. It doesn't really matter with something that's just a single layer of polygons, because there is no backface. And shadow mode, I'm going to switch to alpha hashed. So you can see we can get these nice shadows. Now, you do get a better resolution when you render. All right, now I'm going to turn off my selections. I'm going to switch into my camera view. Same thing, it's really coming together. It's looking quite nice. All right, now let's make these rings look even better. So I'm going to just come over here. I'll turn my scale way up a bit. Now, one thing we can do is I can go into edit mode and hit Control R to create a loop cut. And let me show you what that will do to our UVs. Okay, so let me undo that loop cut. So, okay, you can see the UVs. If I do Control R to create a loop cut and do that and just hit escape, it'll stick a loop cut, and you can see now we've got this extra cut here right in the middle of our UVs. If I was to go into edit mode now and select this by holding the Alt and then hit S to scale and drag in, you see how it's like actually stretching these rings now? That's because in here, it's not moving. It's staying the same. So that's kind of how UVs have this kind of power to them, where you can, work between both environments. So we can create like sort of a denser setup of rings here and a wider setup out on the other side. All right, now let's take our rings, and I want to figure out the material for these guys. I could bring my roughness down, and I like the specular being up. I'm pretty sure if we turn up our samples, yeah, samples is what matters for alpha hash. So if you're not getting a good result with your final render, you just turn up your render samples, and it's going to look a lot better. Let's add in a little variation to the color on this. So I'm going to grab my color ramp here. I'm going to grab the noise, bring the factor in, and then what I can do is I could set these colors to be the colors that I want and stick this into the base color. This will give me the ability to drag these around to have different colors at different rings. I think what I might do is like have a bit of light there, and then Shift D, rotate this one around so I can get a bit of a pinprick off that. And I might turn this one down a touch, so it's just kind of hitting off that. And I might make this like a blue. And let's create a UV sphere. And I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to unlock my camera to view. And I'll just bring that way out. And I'm going to put a new material on it. I'm going to make it an emission material. I'll turn it way up, and I'll make it blue as well. It's like blue planet, blue sun kind of thing. We can also take this. I wonder what would happen if we Shift A, Mesh, UV Sphere. Grab this out. And grab Y. Let's bring this out so we get a shadow on our planet. Right? Shade smooth. What if this is like a moon? I hope you learned some really exciting stuff with this video. I hope that you picked up some cool tricks. You've got a better idea of how UVs work, even though they're pretty confusing. And you're ready to make some cool rings. You could push this effect a whole lot further than what I've done. So I'd be curious to see what you do. So feel free to join the Discord. Link is in the description below, or it's in the About section on Twitch. Jump in there and post up your images in the Show and Tell section, and we'll all have a look at what you've done. We've got a great community over there, so it's really worth joining. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. That helps people discover these videos, and it really helps the channel grow. I appreciate it. Check out the Patreon and the Gumroad and Blender Market. All the links are in the description. All the different ways you can support what I'm doing. It's worth your time, so check it out. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, had a good time, and learned a few cool things. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think, and let me know of any other video suggestions that you've got of tutorials you'd like to see. I'm always happy to take those on board. Don't forget to check out the Patreon and all the other cool things that we've got. Lots of extra content for you everywhere you look. So I'll catch you in the next tutorial. Until then, see you later. Bye.